went in yesterday afternoon to the third graders, and they're learning their letters, and they asked me what my favorite Hebrew letter was. And then they all went around and said what their favorite letter is. And then they asked me what their teacher's favorite letter is. And I'm like, oh, I know the answer of what any third grade Hebrew school teacher's favorite letter is. The Aleph. Because she always asks you to make the sound of the Aleph, right? They all sat silently. So I also think I have a feeling of what your favorite letter is. You're all making the sound of the Aleph. All right. I, however, don't get to sit here and make the sound of the Aleph. So the bracha for Torah study, Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu asok b'divrei Torah. And part of what's difficult about this class is that we don't we don't always have the same group of people present because we quite sadly lose a few along the way. So it's not the first time, and it's really it's a sad thing. Lane used to be able to come here and hang out with us, and came to Minyan this morning, Baruch Hashem, but wasn't going to come to class. Maybe next week. But yeah. So Lane. This is
Minyan this morning. Who's he talking?
You're supposed to go to Minyan when you're in mourning, right? That's the proper thing to do. So with that, can keep her in mind during our learning, but we should learn anyway, or not anyway, but Davka. I think we're in the middle of chapter 4, right? Where we were hopefully moving past Cain and Abel and sort of this little speed bump in humanity's beginning. And then we get to the first of what people don't like, which is what we're going to do no matter what, which is genealogies, popularly known as the begats. That's where we're at. So we have to place a continue with that. One last thing before we leave, because I want to just glancing at the Rashi, before we leave it, this one leaps out at me. Lakain ot. God put a sign on Cain's on Cain. So Cain walks around with a sign on him that indicates don't touch this guy, right? Or be punished if you touch him. And it sort of varies on what that sign is thought to be. You can see medieval art or whatever, where it's like a big horn or something like that, like the sign of Cain. Ot, of course, doesn't just mean sign, though it can mean that. Like if you, from Vishamru, Ot hi leolam, the Shabbat is a sign, an eternal sign between me, God, and the people of Israel. When you keep Shabbat, it's a sign. The covenant, but also can mean letter. So Rashi reads it as that it's a letter, that God puts a letter of the divine name on Cain's forehead. So Cain's walking around with a big yud, presumably on his forehead, or a big hay or something. So right, the good link. The good one. That's the right. So Cain then goes east. Then Cain wanders off east of Eden, the land of Nod, or the land of roaming. Verse 17. Vayada Cain et ishto. This is also the line that everyone loves. And Cain knew his wife. So who's Mrs. Cain? We don't know.
We didn't know who she was either.
Correct. Mrs. Noah also doesn't have a name. Mrs. Noah is the bigger gap. I mean, we'll get to this later because, I mean, Eve is famous for being the mother of all the living, right? But guess who else is the mother of all the living?
Noah's wife.
Noah's wife. I guess, yeah, everyone. I mean, I guess the sons also, it's not like Noah's sons have wives, but still the sons, at least 50% of that union, or 25% is to Mrs. Noah. Yeah, Mrs. Noah is the mother of all the living, and Mrs. Noah has no name. So that seems to be the bigger oversight. I'm going to dig it out. It's floating somewhere in this building. So I've mentioned before, I have a book on Mrs. Noah, and she does have a name from the Midrash, but we'll wait till we get to Mrs. Noah. But Mrs. Cain does not have a name. Where does she come from? Either Rashi will say that there were twins with each birth that Eve has, and it's just not mentioned that it was twins. So he right, yeah, so that's so it's a giggly thing for people, but one, what else are you gonna do? Two, don't read the genealogies of the crowned heads of Europe into the 20th century. Like, it's not, so this is one of those things where, again, people get offended by gender norms in the Torah, when it's like, have you checked the 20th century? This isn't, or most of the world today. It's not, you're right. It's foreign to our culture, but the weirdos are us, not them. We're the exception.
Both my grandparents were first cousins. On both sides, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say, right. And that's why you check yichus, right.
Yeah, I get it now.
Nice. Right. So, but I would say, especially among Ashkenazi, certainly among Ashkenazi Jews, no, not a.
Your family's Sephardic.
Oh yeah, there you go. Oh yeah, there you are.
You never know.
You never know. So that let's see if I can see the twins thing. And I don't know so Rashi at the very beginning of chapter 4, when it says it's the Va'et in verse 1, the verse 2, V'tosif leledet et achiv et Havel, and she continued, i.e., to give birth, giving birth to his brother et Havel. And so Rashi reading with the Midrash very closely, et Cain et Havel. The et could just be a preposition that doesn't exist in English, indicating the direct object after it, or it can sometimes mean with, as it does in the previous sentence. She says, I created a child et God, which we translate as with. So the et here goes untranslated, as it normally goes untranslated. Rashi reads it as with. So what is it? The three appearances of the word et in that verse are amplifications. Ribuim hem. Milamed, in order to teach us, nolda im kind, that a female twin was born with Cain and with Abel. And that's why it says, and she added. Like, why does it say, and she added children, which is a weird thing to say. It's like, oh, because there were additional children with each birth that it's not mentioning. Why do we need to know that? Because Cain's going to marry somebody, and it's going to be his sister. Or you can read forward into chapter 5, where it'll talk about other children. But yes, either way, by definition, it's got to be the sister.
But only the 3 boys are mentioned.
But only the boys are mentioned, because if you look in this genealogy list, you'll see girls aren't. And it doesn't mean that they're not there. It means that the author is clearly just giving us a selective history, right? Is not, this isn't a, right, but that, again, like, this is to the point, right? It's not, that's not how they're tracing these things. They're not giving you a, yeah, so 100%. When you say chauvinist, I don't know, chauvinist isn't even the right word, because that that's almost like too light.
No, it's
Like,
patriarchal and.
yeah, like the point of the society is that males are the primary and females are the, again, like the secondary adjunct. So
No comment, Norm.
they're not, so again, as always, they're not nothing, but this isn't how we trace things. I mean, you still see, this still shows up in our society, like people tend to have names that come from the paternal line, right? Not everywhere, but it's pretty common. And that's sort of, and that's how they trace things. So this is where they're going. The JPS sign-on notes, the first killing has taken place and justice has been done. Human life has been extinguished, but life must go on. Humankind proliferates, which is the key thing, right? Because God had promised you will be fertile and increase. So part of this is you're going to be fertile and increase. More in the next chapter, but also here. Cain and his descendants are now listed 7 generations in all, right? So again, you have the feeling that these things are being very stylized. When something happens 7 times in the Torah, it's not like an accidental number, right? It shows that there's like a order to things. The genealogy is linear, with only the firstborn mentioned until the 7th generation. Then the list becomes segmented and more than one branch is included. So we'll pause and we'll get to more of this in a second of what's going on. So Cain knew his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch, Hanoch. Hanoch is, like the root is like pinuch, it's like education, to learning, and also enosh, man or mortal. If Adam means human being, here Adam's grandson also has a name that Enosh means like mortal man, right? It has like a set. So Cain, after watching a guy die, gives his son the name also man, but like again with a mortal man thing. There's a sense of the hint of death is already present. And he was a builder of a city, and he called the name of the city like that of his son, Hanoch. So Cain is the founder of cities. By the way, why would he want to found a city?
He can't be in the garden anymore, and he can't hang out with the rest of them.
And you can't toil with the soil.
He can't toil the soil, right? So not only is he out of the garden, but like part of his curse is that the ground's not going to work for you. You use the ground to try and cover up your crime, so the ground's not going to work for you. So if you can't work the ground, what do? You move to the city, right? And again, this is like there's no angle. They're not trying to be like you see already what you can be the wise guy and be like, what do you mean city? He's the only guy in the world, right? So again, it's an indication the author doesn't mean for you to be reading this that way, right? Like it's not the fundamentalist literalists and the fundamentalist skeptics sort of can have problems with that. I think like the point of it is be like, oh, you're supposed to be like, oh, got it, city. Which it does, by the way, overturn the curse, because the whole half the curse is the ground won't work for you, and the other half is you're supposed to be a wanderer. And the one thing, like living, like this is the most settled thing you can do is to like live in the city. But
Yeah, but we didn't know how far he wandered
right, to get to
build
the
his
city, right.
and stuff like that.
But this no, so there is a the next generation, Irad, has a there is a city in Iraq that has a name that maps onto that, like in Mesopotamia, which is where this is taking place. So not Arad in the Negev, but he'll note it here. Irad, their note here is, so he then found a city. He's a founder of urban culture. The soil being accursed and unproductive for Cain is put to use to him for wholly new purposes. The idea of a city owing its existence to individual initiative accords well with ancient Near Eastern experience. Furthermore, the notion that a farmer originated the city is consistent with the fact that the rise of urban centers historically followed the wake in the wake of development of agriculture. Curiously, in Sumerian tradition, the first city was Ilru, now called Tel Asharin in southern Mesopotamia, where excavations have revealed the oldest site in that part of the world. It has been suggested, therefore, that the statement in verse 17, he founded a city and named it after his son, really belongs here, not to Hanoch, but to that Hanoch, not Cain, built the first city and named it for his son. Idru, the Mesopotamian name, being the same shorish as Hanoch's son, Irad. So either way, the point being, there is a city that might be linked, but almost it's just cities. And you'll find a constant skepticism of cities throughout Genesis, and really, in some level, throughout the tradition. Jews now, and for hundreds of years, have lived in cities, but like the Torah is skeptical of cities and likes the country better. So Cain founds the first city, but Cain, not a good guy, right? So and then the next big city, like the next big city we encounter is going to be Bavel. Not good people, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like you notice that often these guys, like that they, the desired job seems to be shepherd, not anything urban, but something pastoral. And some read this as sort of like a skepticism of cities and their corrupting influences. Not just obviously in modern times, but even way back. So the first city isn't accidental, and it's not accidental that it's Cain doing it, or Cain's son. 18. And Irad was born to Enoch, and Irad fathered Mehuyael, and Mehuyael fathered Metzuael, and Metzuael fathered Lamech. And Lamech took 2 wives. So now we have first note of women, the first note of polygamy. He's the founder of polygamy, it seems. This one's name was Adah, and the second one's name was Zillah. And Adah gave birth to Yabael. He was the father of tent dweller and cattleman. So again, you have these things being founded. Like, what's the point of this genealogy? Part of it is how these things come into existence. Why is that important?
And sheep and cattle don't get along.
Sheep and right, yeah. So no, so it's branching off, like to right, yeah. Right. Says this really well. Oh yeah, this. Sarna writes, the list continues a silent polemic against the mythological concepts of the ancient world. which attribute the event of culture to divine or semi-divine figures. And he goes through the list, and I don't have to give it to you, of like all of the Mesopotamian gods that create, like there's one half man, half fish that creates the sciences and the social system and writing and art. Nil, the air god, creates agricultural tools, and god of water chaos, creates magic and wisdom, the arts and crafts and music. In Egypt, Thot created scales and balances. Osiris taught agriculture and the arts of life. And Ptah was the patron god of artists and men of letters in Ugaritic and Phoenicia. Koshar is a smith and artisan, developing the plow, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Greek, Athena invents the plow and the rake, and Apollo finds towns. In other words, in all these other cultures, all of these sort of like amazing advances that people would have seen as amazing advances are gifts from the gods. The gods are the only ones who can do this. So what's part of the point of all of this weird genealogy? All that stuff that everyone else says are like gifts from the gods. You know who did that? People. That's part of it. Or it's possible that that's part of it, is the emphasis on human agency rather than divine gifts. So, which is sort of ironic, because now people read these stories and think the opposite, that they're polemics for a divine-centered universe rather than humanism. Whereas in the original context, it may have been something of the opposite of that was going on, or that people were supposed to get out of it. So all these things elsewhere in all the surrounding neighborhoods were gifts from God. Here, not so much. Right. We could let's see. Go on. And the name of his 21. The name of his brother was Jubal, was Yuval. He was the ancestor of all who play the lyre and pipe, which is Kinor ve'ugav. Right? These pop up later. You know them from Psalm 150. Kinor and ugav. Kinor, lyre, the only stringed instrument that'll pop up in the Torah, and ugav, some sort of flute pipe type thing. Again, music, otherwise gift from gods, here created by people. And it's a new occupation, right? Like, what are they doing in the cities? Like all these things. Like, so you see, like, yeah. Human society is slowly being formed, as it were. Yeah. The David obviously will pick up as a famous Kinor player later on. As for Zillah, she bore Tubal Cain, who forged all the implements of copper and iron. Tubal Cain's a weird name because it's so rare to have a like sort of two names shoved together. But that's what we have here. And he seems to be the founder of metallurgy, right? Copper. One would think, like it's so like you can't avoid the conclusion. So yes. What does Alter say? But yeah. And the sister of Tubal Cain was Naamah. So this is we have a few women in this thing, in this list, Lamech's wives, and Naamah. Naamah is the one who will be, the Midrash will say, is Mrs. Noah, because the rabbis hate anonymity, and whenever there's a random name in the text, they're always like, you know who that is? That's really this other person, right? So Mrs. Noah is unnamed, and they're uncomfortable with that. They're like, well, she should have a name, shouldn't she? The Torah wouldn't not let us know who it is. Well, it does. It drops in this otherwise seemingly random name and to let us know that this is who she is. Right. So Na'ama, meaning pleasantness, is in the Midrash, Mrs. Noah. And in the little children's book that I'm going to look around to find, is a very quick midrash that when Noah goes around saving all the animals, Na'ama goes around and saves all the seeds.
Oh.
She has an apron with many pockets, and she goes around and takes all of the seeds, puts them in her pockets. So,
Well, that changes the name for himself. I always called her Flo because I just figured it went with the.
We went with the story of the water, right? Na'ama. So that's, which also, that's how they'll read these things. Well, Tubal came as every tool of copper and iron. The sister of Tubal came was Na'ama, which it is weird that she sort of gets dropped in there. And that also, so all of these characters may have had huge backstories that everyone knew. And they were like, oh, we don't need to do this because everyone knows who they are. We don't know them. Because whatever it was didn't survive, but it might have been there all along. And that's, again, you see the Midrashic project is to make those links. Why would the Torah isn't dropping in a non sequitur? It's got a point. It's just, you got to figure out what the point is. And Lemech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, hearken my voice. You wives of Lemech, give ear to my speech. For a man I have slain for my wound, a boy for my bruising. For sevenfold Cain is avenged, and Lemech 70 and 7. All right, so this is a weird little insertion here. One, it's the first long, proper instance of biblical poetry. One of the key signs of biblical poetry, which Alter sort of is that's his other shtick outside of translating is specific poetry. The easiest thing to note is that it is parallelism, right? Where lines are in couplets. The first half of the line and the second half of the line say almost the same thing, just using slightly different language. First half, Ada and Zillah, hearken my voice. Second half, you wives of Lemech, give ear to my speech. Right? That's saying the same thing twice. That's how you know it's a poem. And that's how they note usually we'll see this in the text, they'll make it look like a poem, we'll hit return after each line. For a man I have slain for my wound, back half, a boy for my bruising. Now, is a boy the same as a man? Not quite, but it might be like a taunt. He thinks he's a man, but when I fought him, he was just a boy. But the same thing. It's saying the same thing twice. For sevenfold Cain is avenged, and Lemech 70 and 7. So what does that mean? We don't know. Violence clearly runs in the family.
Got it. Explanation from Rashi
Bakasha.
that I don't understand.
So we'll try to explain the explanation.
Lamech was blind, and his son Tubal Cain would lead him. One day Tubal Cain saw Cain, and mistaking him for an animal, he bade his father to shoot an arrow, which killed Cain. When Lamech realized he had killed Cain, he beat his hands together in grief and accidentally killed his son. His wives were angered and refused to live with him. He tried to appease them. If the punishment of Cain, an intentional murderer, was delayed until the 7th generation, surely my punishment will be deferred many times 7 because I killed accidentally. So it's as clear as mud.
Wow. That's the violent version of you give a mouse a cookie. So that actually that links on some level to there's one read of the Cain story that the sign that God puts on Cain to make sure nobody kills him is a gigantic horn. So if he's walking around in the forest and somebody sees a gigantic horn, thinks he's an animal.
As his blind father shoot an arrow.
And as his blind father shoots an arrow, and hits him, kills him, exit right. Is that the 77? Yep, here we are. All right, so this is from the Tanchuma, Midrash Bereshit Rabbah. It's understood as follows, right? So here's a different explanation, Stephen. Let me see. Lamech didn't kill anyone at all. What happened? Nasav Perustomimenu, his wives separated from him. Once they had fulfilled once they had conceived and given birth. The Lefi Shegerato Gzera, because a decree had been ordained to wipe out the seed of Cain after 7 generations. So they're imagining like sort of a global conspiracy against Cain, and the wives, and so Lamech's wives are like, we're getting out of here. Amru Ma'anu Yildim Le'Ve'ela. Why should we give birth for like no reason, right? If people are going to like hunt down Cain's descendants as soon as they can after 7 generations, because he's like the source of all evil, he's the Darth Vader character. Then we should then what's the point of it all? So his wives leave him because they don't want to have any more kids. L'machar l'mabulba. Sotef etakol, and then there's going to be a flood, and it's going to get rid of everything. It goes on. I feel like we're going to get lost along the way. Oh yeah, there's a lot here. Oh, but Naamah is just, his comment is simple. Naamah, he ishto shel Noah. It's Noah's wife. So it is a loaded and strange little poem. Some things that there's a longer thing going on here, and we're only getting a snippet of a longer poem, or maybe this is it.
The reason that Adam and Eve have another child because Cain's children, the line is going to end.
He's right. This is a thing. After this genealogy, which is going to end soon, there's no more mention of any of these characters. So maybe either it's there are a few different options. One, they wanted 3 kids, or Seth is going to be a replacement for Hevel after Hevel died, or they want one child who's going to survive.
But it says that Adam lived 800 years and begot sons and daughters.
Right. So yeah, more than 3. Yeah, three are named. Right. Right. That's the next line. Right. And Adam again knew his wife. And so this, by the way, leaves so that's the end of the Cain narrative. Right. The Cain narrative ends with Lamech giving this sort of like weird, violent poem. And Adam again knew his wife, and she bore a son and called his name Seth, as to say, God has granted me other seed in place of Abel, for Cain has killed him. As for Seth, him too a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. And it was then that the name of the Lord was first invoked. So, by the way, where we heard the name Enosh before was Cain's Cain's son.
Enoch.
What is he?
Is it not the same spelling?
Yeah.
Enosh. Shmo Enosh with a shin as opposed to with a chaf. So you'll note here this name, along with, as you go through the line of Seth, you'll notice parallels that are usually close but not exact to the other list. Yeah, Alan.
But then there's an Enoch that shows up later.
Yeah,
No, Enosh.
close but not exact. And here, let's see, the song, because of the song of Lamech, because of the brevity of the poem, the loss of its original context, the interpretation of the verses is uncertain. An attractive suggestion is that they constitute Lamech's taunts, threats, and boastings, which are kind of customarily uttered in ancient times to those about to gauge a battle, like David and Goliath. They trash talk each other before doing it. And then after the taunt, beginning with verse 25. The line of Cain passes into oblivion. Despite the air of gloom that pervades the chapter, it concludes on a hopeful note. Humankind is regenerated through another son of Adam and Eve. So that's Seth, which is Shet Shin Tav, meaning something like to set. And Enosh, again, something like meaning man. And then you have this weird line to conclude it. As Adonai, that it was then that people began to invoke the name of God, of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. Well, again, it's not meant to be this comprehensive history. It's a history of something, right? Very specific. Just like, I don't know, if there's a specific story being told, and the story being told seems to be primarily one relating between humans and God. And this, by the way, sort of sets out that the original sort of like way people related to God was to God, and not all the polytheism and all the idols that the Torah will spend most of its time rallying against, right? So, one, that. Two, God having a relationship with people is pre-Abraham, right? Here, these we're way pre-Abraham, and they're calling on God's name, as it were. And it seems to then be lost and then come back. Though you'll notice that almost it's a strange bit, because almost after the story of Moses, when God again sort of reasserts, "This is my name, Yud-Heh Vav-Heh," you'll frequently get names that have God's name folded into them, right? The Eliyahu's,
Like Yael.
Yael, where you have a Yud-Hey in the name, indicating like sort of like of Godness, right? Hizkiyahu, and all the rest of them, right? Like the Shayahu, and like the Isaiahs, the Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah's, etc. That's that. The in Genesis, no names have that suffix, right? They only have El, Aleph Lamed, like as the link to God, Rachel, etc. The indicating that the earlier stages are relating to God as El, and later stages that relate to God as Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. And you see that in the names that get used. So this, you see it here. So if like this could be either retrojecting that name back into an earlier stage or not. But yeah. this is people are invoking God's name, and that they're sort of like it's a religious impulse that seems to be coming bottom up. God doesn't say invoke my name. It seems to be this bottom up thing that's happening, right? Which puts a different, like the sacrifices that Cain brought and Abel. Who knows? But that but yeah. So and now chapter. I'll pause. Questions. Chapter 5 switches again. Chapter 5 is almost like a third creation story, right? Like there's the first two, and now because we're really wiping the slate of Cain's line, Abel didn't have a line. Everything's going through Seth, really, right? So, so now we really start over again, and it's like a third start. There's not going to be a fourth, don't worry. But
After Noah.
right, yeah, oh yeah. So right, I stand corrected. Right. So this is the third of 4 starts. To everything. You all but could start here.
When people involved in politics, and it was easy to see that the gods could do anything. They could create all sorts of wonders, and that would contribute to the gods.
Right.
But as humans become carpenters and whatever other potters and whatever, we don't know how they got there, right? They're just there.
Meaning to the gods, as it were.
No, humans.
How people.
Gods are gods.
Oh, who taught them how to do it?
Is there any explanation or consideration?
I mean, you see what the text is. The text itself is Spartan, right? There's not.
Rashi must have had a comment on that.
Right, there's not much there. Like the how I mean that's a how do you do it? The point seems to be that people are capable of learning and that they're learning new things. And I think it's like not like when I say that stuff, it's not an insignificant philosophical point. Because right, and I haven't like necessarily thought this all through, but I'm gonna give it a shot. Because if you think that big leaps in innovations are dependent on a gift from the gods, then for a new innovation, you're going to wait for a gift from the gods. And if you think that people can do this stuff, then you might think that people can do this stuff. And the next innovation,
Bottom up.
even if it doesn't, maybe I can do it, but even if it doesn't do it, maybe Alan's going to figure it out. But I'm not then going to say to Alan that, oh, your invention isn't really good because the real good stuff comes from the gods. Like maybe you're like the guy who comes up with it.
It's an amazing movie.
That's the big thing. And I would say like you could, like if it's like part of among the many things that are issues, but like that's part of the whole American idea, right? Similarly.
So yes, Superman can fly. Right? You believe in God. That's an easy
Right.
one,
Right.
That it's gonna make an airplane.
Is a different thing.
I mean, it's really I was just thinking about it.
Right.
It's really an amazing movie.
Yeah. So and why I don't care about any of the superhero movies really, but why Batman is in fact cooler, right? Because Batman has no special skills or no special supernatural power. He's just got a cool car and a belt.
Yeah.
And a ton of money, right? Yeah, definitely the money helps. Right. So a lot of the issues are solved with
He has
a
Alfred.
huge inheritance, right? And a butler. But yeah, like I do think that's a thing. And like again, it shows how a certain philosophical difference can have impact, right? If you also think like that, again, like sort of in that democratic nations ideally are supposed to like give people a sense that, oh, like I have ownership over this and I can do it. And that it's not it's not a superior class that can.
We're made in this image. Right.
And as God creates, so I can create, right? So it's not, so when this is said to be polemic against, it's not just red team versus blue team or yellow team versus purple team or whatever. Like it's not random, and it's not like, and I get to take sides. It's not that everyone's equal in every culture. It's like, oh, like there are like cool things here that help give birth. Why does this obscure people in the ancient Near East end up having a disproportionate impact on humanity as opposed to anyone else? And it's not an inherent superiority or anything like this. It's a series of ideas, including this one, that helps push you forward. And many think that the ancient peoples thought of history not as linear, but as a circle. You know, it's sort of like it's with the seasons, right? Like sort of like there's winter and there's spring and there's summer, and a generation comes and a generation goes, and everything just sort of like we keep going in that circle. And Hebrew thought, for better or for worse, sees it as a line, which is even like evident here. Like sort of like there's a trajectory, and that trajectory of we were somewhere and we're going somewhere else is different than my life should look like my father's life, like my grandfather's life, like my grandfather's life, and yeah. So they don't have everything right. It's patriarchal. There's no doubt about it. Like there's no like, and I'm happy to say that I think that that giving everyone equal opportunity is the way we're supposed to roll. Like so, so absolutely. But part of it I think is this, and it's worth sort of uncovering that. Yeah. So Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam B'yom bara Elohim Adam B'dmut Elohim asa oto. This is the account of the generations, the descendants, the chronicles of Adam. On the day of God's creating of Adam, God made Adam in the divine image. That already is a wild line, right? Because if you remember, the divine image is from chapter 1, like that famous line. And then in chapter 2, it's Adam. Like that guy, as it were. So this sort of like, and we've been in chapter 2 mode the whole time, right? Chapter 2, where Adam is formed from the dust of the earth, and then trying to find a mate, and Chava, and the garden, and the serpent, and Cain, and Abel, and Cain's line. And here it's almost like we're like zapping back to the first chapter where we haven't been, right? If you wanted to, you could drop out chapters 2, 3, and 4 and read from chapter 1 to chapter 5 and have a coherent story, right? This is the kind of things that leads to all sorts of apocrisis, all sorts of heresies in critical biblical scholarship. But you see how that works, right? Like you could drop that all stuff out, and you would like miss some. Again, it's greater than the sum of parts. Part of what makes the Bible great is like these different ideas in there, but you can see it. And I don't have it in my head, but like I'll bet that if I like looked at all the sources, that 1 and 5 are the E author, and that 2, 3, 4 are the J author. So I don't have that stuff in my head, but I would guess. And you even see it because the last line of 4 is that people began to be krashmo b'shem Adonai. It ends with and people began to call the name of Adonai, Yud He Vav He, and then 5 begins, on the day that Elohim created Adam, right? Not Yud He Vav He, right? All through chapter 2 was all Yud He Vav He, Elohim was all Adonai Elohim, as the name. Chapter 1's only Elohim. And then we end chapter 4, like we've just been referring to Yud Hey Vav Hey, and now we're back to this name. This is the record of Adam's line. And in one of the greats, if I can throw out heresy like that, balance it out with something rabbinic, the great debate among the Tanaim, Rabbi Akiva says that the most important line in the Torah is "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," love your neighbor as yourself, and his counterpart says that no, you're wrong. The most important line in the Torah is "Zeh Sefer Tolot Adam." This line, chapter 5, verse 1, is the most important line in the Torah. Why? We all come from the same source. You think you're better than anyone else? You're not. We're all from the same source, which is again somewhat polemical that I wasn't born of higher stock than you. I'm not descended from the gods and you're not. We're all descended from Adam. So that's one of the Talmudic debates. And Alter's comment on this: nothing reveals the difference of biblical conception of literature from later Western ones more strikingly than the biblical use of genealogies as an intrinsic element of literary structure, which is a way of saying everyone in the West thinks that the list of begats are boring. The biblical author thinks they're essential, right? He thinks it's essential. One, it's a separation of narratives, right? This is ending the creation narratives, and will lead us into chapter 6 will be the flood. So it's an end of an era, so it marks sort of it's like a chapter separation in a sense. And the beginnings of the genealogical lists are linked thematically with the initial injunction, be fruitful and multiply, and with all the subsequent stories of a threatened or thwarted procreative drive. Meaning part of these things is that everyone's like, oh, and they had sons and daughters, and they had lots of children. And by the way, the next series of stories, the heart of the book is going to be these series of stories where, do we just say, and Sarah had lots of sons and daughters? No. The whole point is that she struggles, like mightily. And Rebecca had lots of sons and daughters. No, the whole point is that she struggled. And Rachel had lots of sons and daughters. No, the whole point is that she struggled. Right? There's going to be this, there is sort of like a tension between like this part of the story and the later parts. It almost highlights their struggles.
I'm telling you that all along. Michael, the
Lifespans.
how long their lifespan is, this section is. Lifespans, or even just the people in the rest of the them.
Yeah.
Some odd years.
They're not. There are a number of them out there. None are like sort of like so convincing as to be. That's it.
A lot of kale.
A lot of kale. That's what remained from the garden is the kale. What can I say about well, I'll give you a Friedman. The long lifespans in the early portions of the Torah are an old question. Some assume that the ancients must have counted years differently. Yeah, his neckline, but that is not correct. I paused at the wrong time. Right, so but the point being, like, that's the thing. So obviously he's saying that he doesn't agree with that, though others obviously put that forward. If we divide Adam's 930 years by 10 to get it within normal range, then how shall we divide Moses' 120? After these early stories, you can usually divide by 2 and make sense of it, right? If you just divide Abraham's 178 by 2, you get he's an old man. If you divide, Joseph's 110 or Moses 120 by 2, like you're sort of like, okay, like I can sort of like I can deal with this. Right, the magic number to divide it, right? Or right. So yeah, like later on you can do that, though I don't love doing it. I think part of the point is that they want to say he was really old, which you don't get if you're like Moses came back to Pharaoh at age a little bit. I guess you get it in its context. Yeah, if Moses goes back to Pharaoh at age 80, it's easier if you divide it in half that he's just sort of he's like a 40-year-old guy like that. It works, and he's got 2 small kids. Like it scans more easily at that point, but not in these early chapters. It's clear that this author thought of a year as a normal solar year because that's how long the flood lasts. The point to note is, if lifespans are pictured as growing short, that lifespans are pictured as growing shorter. The 10 generations from Adam to Noah approach ages of 1,000. The last one to live more than 900 years is Noah. The next 10 generations start with Shem, who lived 600 years, and lifespans decline after him. The last person to live more than 200 years is Terach, Abraham's father. Abraham's 175, Isaac 180, Jacob 147, lived long lives, but not as long as their ancestors. Moses lives to be 120, which is then understood to be at some point like the maximum for a human life. So his point is that I don't know. The point is that it's steadily declines. 10 generations from Adam to Noah all live almost 1,000 years. 10 generations from Noah to Abraham, and that's they're living less. And then after that, like after the patriarchs, they're capped at 120.
But the world changed from all of that. Each time, there's more on the earth, there was more animals, and things like that. So the environment as now has changed for each one.
I call that the role.
Superman.
Yeah. Superman can fly. Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Yeah, Superman can fly, which is like just part of it. And I know you asked like in the spirit of like be in the story, like what's the idea of it? Some also say like sort of like, oh, it means like the family line or something like that you're not thinking of the man. It's not one person living 900 years. It's sort of like this family line. And it's slowly taking hold, as it were.
Hmm,
Right.
that's good.
And then Sarna's note on is the remarkably long lives enjoyed by the patriarchs before the flood, according to the widespread folkloristic notion that associates ancient heroes with extraordinary longevity. Compared, however, with Mesopotamian ideas, the biblical figures give the appearance of moderation. Combined total of the years reigned by the 10 antediluvian pre-flood kings in the list of Berosus in Mesopotamian literature comes to 432,000. That of the Sumerian king list adds up to 241,200. By way of contrast, in Genesis, the years from Adam to the flood number 1,656. What the specific figures represent individually and collectively, whether they're invested with symbolic meaning or the constituents of some comprehensive schematization, is presently unknown. If any such exists, has not yielded its secret yet. And the Septuagint, he says, gives slightly different numbers. So like yeah, who knows? I'll see if I can pull up something better for you by next time. The number that everyone agrees is significant is the 10 generations from Adam to Noah, and the 10 generations from Noah to Abraham are a sense of the world is ordered and not random, which is again part of the core idea that's being communicated, that things aren't happening randomly, that this is sort of like there's a God in charge, and that's sort of like you see it because it's being done in an orderly way.
We should go by the Septuagint because 60 guys said
At the same time.
So that should be the authority.
That's the authoritative translation. No editing needed. Right, I'm done. We get to do this all again next week. Oh, wait, I would like to do a Kaddish, a Kaddish Rabbanan because I can. That's why I brought up the Siddur to remind myself. And Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shmei Rabbah.
Amen.
Rakutei v'mitmachutei v'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayei l'chol Beit Yisrael v'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru
Amen.
Amen Barach l'olam omer Yitzrach v'yishabach v'yifa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmeid k'shav v'yikol v'yachata v'shirata v'yishachata v'nechemata ta'amiran v'yamah v'imru Amen. Well, va'al Rabbanan va'al Talmidei va'al Kol Talmidei Talmidei va'al Kol Ma'an Daskin v'Araita Diva Atar Adin v'Diva Chol Atar v'Atar Hey L'chon L'chon Shlama Rabba Ina v'Chisa v'Rachmin v'Chayin Arachim v'Zadar v'Bicha Min Kadam Avon v'Bishmai v'Imru Amen Shlama Rabba Min Shemai v'Chayin Atovim Aleinu v'Al Kol Yisrael v'Imru Amen
Amen.
V'Mav v'Achamav Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu v'Al Kol Yisrael v'Imru
Amen.